and we're back on Second Street talking about South American politics, in particular Venezuela, Brazil, and lessons for Canada about some of the problems that are happening down there. Anna, before the break, we were talking about what your friend has gone through, what other political opponents of the governing regime have faced. You mentioned that your friend sadly has been taken by the state and thrown in jail simply because she doesn't support the state. But it sounds dire in that you've got a lot of the sort of the more grassroots political opponents of the government that have been thrown in prison, but you even have sort of the leader of the opposition who's had to flee the country. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
The elected president, Edmundo González, had to remain in the embassy of the Netherlands for many days after the results of the election, because the government was cracking down and wanted to put him in prison as well. And it's insane when you think that according to the results, he got a victory over Maduro for about 67% of the votes. And the pressure was so much, it was so bad, that they also threatened to keep his daughter in Venezuela, only God knows in what conditions. And it was either he flees to Spain, or, we're going to put you also in El Helicoide. And actually, they kept his daughter in Venezuela. Even now, she's still there. So even right now, his family is not safe. And this just shows you that in the end of the day, Venezuela is not a democracy. This is the biggest confirmation that we just got, because now we have clear evidence of the results. The opposition show what we call the actas, that is the electoral receipts. They have the proof. The government never showed the proof, not even when the Organization of American States told them to do so. They couldn't show anything because they don't have any results to back up their victory. And what they did was to basically turn oppressive. And that's why we now have a president living in Spain in exile and just a dictator ruling the country.
So certainly appalling what's going on. I want to talk with you in a moment, Anna, about what you think Canada should do in response to this. But Marco, I want to just talk with you about Brazil, because we're seeing some very troubling things happening in Brazil too. Could you tell us a little bit about what's going on there?
Brazil is, I'd like to say that Brazil is a special case, but it is not. In the context of Latin America, Brazil has swung to the left and swung to the right, and this is one of the latest iterations of swinging to the left. It's gone from military dictatorships to what basically now is an authoritarian left-wing regime of a former president returned to power, seemingly through some level of fraud, and now is just sort of turning the screws against opposition, trying to take over, trying to follow basically quite a bit of the playbook that we've seen in Venezuela, that we've seen in Nicaragua, by sort of removing layers of opposition, taking over media, trying to control the narrative, and so forth. By all accounts, the election was really, really close. It's hard to lend credence to the fact that a former president under fraud charges, who was in prison for a while, would be so popular and win. But that's what happened.
That's it's surprising, disappointing too, because I hadn't typically thought of Brazil as sort of being on the brink of this type of corruption that's occurring there. I mean, I've famously heard that Twitter's been banned in the country. I don't want to just be critical about South America with this episode. I mean, we've talked about two very disappointing, dire situations. But Marco, when you think about the opposite sort of like leaders in South America, countries that are doing it right, where people are flourishing, where they have democratic rights and so forth, what would be the countries that you would say are leading in South America?
The most exciting thing that is happening in Latin America right now is happening in this tiny little country called El Salvador, where they have re-elected essentially this sort of nearly Hayekian libertarian who is hell-bent on rooting out all corruption, reestablishing a market economy, reestablishing plurality, constitutionalism, serving the people, reconstructing the institutions of the country to serve the people. Investment is flowing in torrents into El Salvador. It's a super exciting thing to see.
Well, that's good that there's some leadership down there for people to look to and hopefully copy. When we come back with more, we'll talk about what Canada can learn from what's happening in South America.